I believe sorry, I'll just have to.
I'm just recording the discussion, so
yeah, not a problem. Not a problem. I've just approved that, so it's all good. Eleanor, if you can change the settings to make me a co-host or something, then I can share the screen.
I did. So yeah, you should be able to.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff.
Okay.
Cool. Right. Well, a bit of background to myself. I never had an intention to make a film about Skylab. I got into it. Well, first of all, when I was 10 years old, I grew up in Sydney. And in the school, I went to the primary school, another student had posted up in the principal's office information about Skylab with the title Skylab is Falling. That was my very first conscious introduction to Skylab. I'm old enough to remember watching as a 3.5-year-old Apollo 17 live on television. And in Australia, December is summertime. So we're watching Jack Schmidt and Gene Cernan walking on the moon, and my father took me outside and showed me the moon and said, "Can you see them on there? Can you see them on there?" So I remember this thing happening in real time. Skylab, I have to admit, I remember seeing bits and pieces on the news as a little boy. But for the most part, my first introduction came in 1979 when it impacted into Australia. At the time, we had the Miss Universe competition being held in Perth, which was also celebrating its 150th anniversary or birthday. And that was the very first place that they put debris from Skylab on public display. And it was a huge oxygen tank, I think it was, that had the insulation around it. And it was like frayed everywhere. It looked like it had just landed from space. And that's the first time we saw that. Now, that article is on display in the USSRC in Huntsville, Alabama, so you can go and see it if you want. The other debris is down in Esperance. Now, before we start with the Q&A, I've got a couple of photos, if you'd like to see them, of the day it crashed in Western Australia. I'll get this one up and running because this really sums up how Skylab looks or looked when it hit, and you can see the locals, including
Mr. Kangaroo.
So that's all that debris is now on display, or artifacts are on display in the Esperance Museum, and it's a big museum dedicated to the history of Esperance. And of course, the biggest thing that ever happened to that tiny town was a space station crashing into it. And when I was there for the 40th anniversary, and I had all my Skylab stuff on because I was there showing the film, everybody on the street would stop me and go, "I remember when Skylab crashed and what I was doing." And I was researching, and I'm thinking, I feel so at home here. One, I'm in Australia, and number two, they all know what Skylab's about. It was fantastic. So, which leads me to another thing. Now, might all think that the name of the space station is Skylab, but it's not. Since it's crashed in Australia, you have to pronounce it now the Australian way, which is Skylab. So, now, I've got the astronauts already into that, so I'm on the way. Now, just to show you, this is the item that was put on display for the Miss Universe competition. There you go. As you can see, that's how it looked when they put it on television. So you're like, yes, that looks pretty burned. So,
wow.
Just trying to think of other stuff that might interest you, and then we'll start with the Q&A. The one thing that I found hilarious, they set up a little shed with all the artifacts that they had collected and were charging people $1 to go see it. That was pretty cool. There is one thing I might show you. Hold on, and then we'll go into the Q&A, I promise. If I can find that. 1979, sorry about this. Oh, maybe we won't. Hold on. Here we go. It doesn't look like I can find it. I had footage of when the thing, somebody had a television camera when it came crashing down, and managed to film it. But what you saw a bit of it, computer graphic representation of what he saw in the film. So anyway, I won't show you that because I can't find it. So anyway, now we can hand over to the audience. I'd love to hear your questions if you have any, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Maybe we can start with Warminster if that's okay. I'm thinking we do maybe 3 questions of, here, and then we can go over to PAX, and kind of back and forth. And I am going to just manipulate the microphone here so people can speak into it.
You want me to
Or take it off, yeah. Take it off. Yeah. Yeah. A long cord. There we go. Okay.
Of course, it's tangled.
Okay. Any questions?
So I noticed you had some interviews with folks from Honeysuckle Creek. I'm wondering if you got to see any of the installation there and what your impressions were of that installation.
Yeah, the Honeysuckle Creek fellows are really, really superb. So down to earth. I've met them before. I know a lot of them already prior to us going there to film them. Unfortunately, Honeysuckle no longer exists. It is now a part of, it always was the national park. Now it's basically a camping area with a sort of iron memorial thing with all the information about what it tracked. You can still go there, you can still visit it. The closest tracking station is Tidbinbilla, which is where we filmed the Honeysuckle guys. And Tidbinbilla is maybe, I don't know, 5 miles down the road. Honeysuckle was decommissioned in 1981, just round about when STS-1, this first space shuttle, was flying. Aurora Valley actually tracked STS-1, and then Tidbinbilla took over. And Tidbinbilla is now specialized in the DSN, the Deep Space Network, and or anything that NASA requires of it. And when you go to the Tidbinbilla facility, as an ordinary visitor, you go into like a small museum. They have, for example, the Apollo Soyuz test project video camera is there. Jack Lausma's training suit is there. Obviously, Skylab debris, and certain aspects of space history. And then there is a monitor, a television monitor, which shows exactly what is being tracked while you're standing there. And we were there when they were tracking Voyager 1. And I remember at the time it was 18-hour delay. So a signal from Voyager 1 would take 18 hours to get to us. That would have been 2017, beginning of 2017 when we were there. They were also tracking, and they were the ones receiving the images when New Horizons flew past Pluto. And I was texting the guys there, Glenn Nagel, who was in the film. I said, how is the vibe there? And he said, it's electric. And he was telling me, we're all so excited waiting to hear this, what's coming through. A fantastic group of people who, made themselves a part of history and did the best job they could. And they were really proud. The one thing that all of them were saying, they were designated the prime station because they were the ones that could fire up the system quickly. So they became the standard for all the other tracking stations to follow. Like, if Honeysuckle can do it, we can do it as well. And you probably are aware of the Parkes radio antenna that was used for the Apollo 11 mission. They were not part of the DSN, but they were a secondary station should it have been required, which it was when Apollo 11 walked on the moon. And they were also instrumental in tracking Apollo 13. And Bernie Smith, who was in the film, was telling us that both Parkes and Honeysuckle normally should have taken 24 hours to set the system up so that they could track a spacecraft. With Apollo 13's dilemma, they did it in 3 hours. So that shows you the dedication of these type of people. They knew their stuff and they knew what they had to do, and they understood the importance of Apollo 13 being securely tracked. They were very quick, extremely quick.
Yeah, in the film, you talked about the space shuttle was supposed to potentially rendezvous with the space lab, and technical problems prevented that. What was the purpose of the shuttle kind of getting to the lab? Was it to save it? Was it to repopulate it, or what?
Yeah, I remember as a kid reading that the shuttle was actually supposed to dock with Skylab. That was around about 77, 78, when they still thought that the shuttle would fly in 1979. Fred Hayes and Jack Lousma had trained for the mission in order to reboost the orbit and possibly then use Skylab at a later date for docking with the shuttle, or for had the shuttle dock with Skylab. The delays of the space shuttle occurred right when the declining orbit started to happen, and there was a proposal. I can't remember the type of rocket. It was not a crewed mission. It would have gone up there automatically. The RMS, I can't remember what the abbreviation stood for. It was an automatic way to reboost Skylab, and they decided the costs were not worth the effort. And there's a news report on CBS the night before it crashed in Australia, and they were highlighting all this. And even the crew of the last mission asked if they could put the thing in a higher orbit, and they were actually declined. So, a lot of things just fell into place that it used to disappoint me, because I thought, they could have saved it. But the one good thing from it, it crashed in my country, and therefore I got interested in it. So we wouldn't have had a film had it been saved. So there you go. It's catch-22.
Else here, and I'm turn it over to Max.
I have one more.
The Russian space station Mir was up there at about the same time with Skylab. It looks as though our Skylab really contributed to a lot of learnings about what they used in the International Space Station. What did Mir contribute? If you know.
I think you're referring to Salyut, which Mir, I think, was launched in the 80s, whereas Salyut was in the 70s. The Russians, as you know, were very secretive about the information they say that they acquired from their missions. NASA always had a policy of making it available to everyone. And one thing I do know, the cosmonauts at a function in the early 90s actually went up to the Skylab engineers in Huntsville and thanked them for having that data made available for them, because it helped them when they were planning the launch of Mir. So the Russians have actually used the data from Skylab in order to prepare themselves for the Mir missions. The one thing I also know, we went in 2016, I think it was, to the STEC Open Day in Noordwijk in the Netherlands, which is where they train the astronauts for ESA. And we asked, I think his name is Dirk Vermond, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name. We asked him, I said, are you aware of using Skylab documentation and Skylab information in preparing for ISS missions? And he said, yeah, we definitely do. He said, the one problem is we haven't even analyzed up to 40% of the data that came from Skylab, because we don't have enough engineers to be able to go through that data. So any kids who might be in the audience, there's your chance. They need people to go through this data.
All right, why don't we turn it over to Pat River for some questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Can you hear us?
So
Yes, certainly
Okay.
can.
awesome. So you mentioned the kids. Did you try following up on any of the students that had experiments on Skylab?
Yeah, the footage you see in there was an 11th hour discovery. I was already sweating, thinking, how am I going to incorporate the student experiments? I have nothing. And then the National Archives made that film available around about, I would say, a month before we had to have it finished for the Coombs Gates and for Space Fest. I had at that point been unable to contact any of the students, but in the meantime, I have spoken with approximately 3 of them. Kathy Jackson, who did the experiment where Ed Gibson is doing the speed reaction test. She is a lecturer at a university specializing in astrophysics or something like that. And the other fellow, I can't remember his name, Donald Slack, is living in Honolulu now and is involved in studying the climate and the vegetation in around Honolulu for the I think the U.S. Geological Society. The one thing I can say about those students, 90% of them ended up being successful in scientific endeavors. There are 2 of them, I think, that unfortunately have passed away in the meantime. But all of them just made a great contribution to science.
This isn't specifically about the film, but I'm curious, they did a lot of studies about the psychology of the people in space. I'm curious if they've studied the psychology of the people who were, for lack of a better phrase, stuck on the ground and separated so far from what they really needed to do. Did they study the psychology of mission control?
I don't believe they did. You know, that's a really good question. I never even thought to look at that. Knowing Skylab, they probably did because they analyzed everything. To give you an example, there is footage of the astronauts going to the bathroom on Skylab for scientific evaluation and engineering evaluation to see if that the toilet facility works. So it would not surprise me if they did study the psychological aspects of being on the ground. I will tell you one story. Last week I was in Florida for the Astronaut Hall of Fame induction, and one of the astronauts was Mark Kelly, and his wife Gabby Giffords was shot in the head just prior to him flying up. At the time that accident happened, or that shooting happened, Scott Kelly was on the International Space Station, and Scott was relating the story. He thought he would have to be the one that would support Mark, who was down on the ground. But he said it quickly reversed, that Mark on the ground had all the support. Scott up on the space station was isolated. So Mark was the one giving support to Scott. So they said it was a very interesting switching of roles. It's opposite to what you would have expected would have happened. So I am certain there is some sort of study out there. I actually have to admit, I have never looked. That's the first time. Your question is outstanding. I would have to have a look at that.
We were discussing what it would be like to be in mission control while they're trying to deploy the parasol and remove the debris from the accident, and just sitting there helpless, watching these guys and listening to them on the radio as they struggle to figure out how to do this. No ability to help them.
That's true. Rusty Swikert and Don Lind were working round the clock in the neutral buoyancy facility in Huntsville. They had gotten the procedure down, so they knew exactly what they were doing. And if you listen to the entire tape, which is available on the Internet Archive, Joe and Pete are extremely frustrated because what they discovered in the neutral buoyancy facility was that there was nothing that they could grab onto on the outside of Skylab, because they had never thought we would have to repair it. Skylab was the very first time where a contingency plan had to be thought about for a space vehicle. So they were learning as they were going along. And the reason Rusty Swikert was on Capcom talking to them while they were trying to get the solar wing out or deploy the parasol is because he had been the one testing it himself with Don Lind in the neutral buoyancy facility. So he at least knew what they were looking at. He had done it himself, and he was the one guiding it. And when you listen to the audio, you can hear the astronauts up there going, Rusty, we're doing this, but I can't see this foothold. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? And Rusty is the one going, look, to the left of you, you will find it, put your foot in it, and you can use it as a foothold. And this goes backwards and forwards. And the EVA to separate the solar panel goes for, I think, 3 hours.
Yeah, you'll notice that the International Space Station studded with grips and places to latch onto.
Yeah. Or like in the film, you know, Jerry Carr was saying we had the umbilical that if the what do you call it? Oh, what's the thing you grapple yourself on with? If that broke, they at least had the umbilicals. That's another thing I found extremely interesting. You know, you think, oh, these astronauts would love to go into a spacewalk. You know, Jerry Carr saying the door opened, he looked out, and he just went, oh, do I really want to do this? And I can only imagine what it's like when you're suddenly faced with this view of planet Earth and you're 240 nautical miles up. And you look down and like Ed Gibson says, I hope that Newton fellow was right.
So question on the filming, you chose all the interviews to be black and white. What was your thought process? How did you get there and why'd you do that?
Do I tell you the truth or do I lie?
Sorry, sir.
No, it's cool. It's you all probably remember the TV show MASH, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Yes.
There was one, and as a kid, I used to love watching the show. There was one episode where a reporter, Cleet Roberts, went to the mobile surgery and interviewed the actor. Well, it was a pretend interview of these doctors. And it always struck me as a kid, wow, it's in black and white. That looks authentic. It looks real. It must be real. And always stuck with me in my head. And while we were planning the film, originally, if you saw the sneak peek in Space Fest, it wasn't like that. But what I wanted to do, I was thinking, try something unusual, because most of the time when you watch a World War II documentary, the modern interviews are color and the archival stuff is black and white. And I thought, switch the roles, because the color footage from Skylab looks fantastic. Why not make the interviews black and white and have the color footage stand out? And the one thing, both my wife and I, when we were doing the evaluation on the film, we noticed that in some of the underwater footage that they were doing in the neutral buoyancy facility, actually had, you notice the colors better after we switched the interviews to black and white. And just I'm an artiste. That's all.
I have to thank you because it gave a bit of a Wizard of Oz flavor to it.
Well, kind of, that's, yeah, you know, that's another thing, you know, as a kid as well, when I watched on television, obviously not in the cinema, I'm not that old yet. When he opens the door and you see it go from black and white into color, or sepia into color, I thought, wow, impressive. And I thought, you know, Skylab is special enough that I would love to have the archival stuff look really, you know, in your face, beautiful.
I say thank you because I had, you know, never seen it, or if I had seen it, I've forgotten it, that footage. Just the
there's a lot of stuff.
Story behind the story. The story behind the story is great. Thank you.
The footage, you can see a couple of the canisters behind me. Extremely difficult to find. It's not impossible. It's not like they're hiding it. But it is difficult and it is expensive, because the only place you can procure this stuff from is the National Archives. And for example, the audio snippet of Al Shepard giving the crew a reprimand on air for covering up a space sickness, that cost me in total about $112 just to get that one tape. Now, it was important enough, and it took me 5 years to find that audio. It was an adventure. I had people who had private collections that they taped off the radio when they were kids. none of them had this audio. And I started to think, is NASA actually trying me to not have me find this? What's going on here? And it turned out that it was just stored under a very oblique name. So if you didn't know what you were looking for, there's no way you would have thought, oh, that's the tape with it. And to be perfectly honest, when I ordered the thing from NARA, I had no idea if it was actually on there. I was hoping, and it took 10 days for them. They take the tape, they send it to a third-party vendor, they copy it, they digitize it. They ask me, do I want a CD or am I happy with a WAV file sent via FTP? And I said, just send me the file. And it was late in the evening on Friday. We had our Kickstarter Blu-rays. We were ready to go with them to give to all the people that sponsored our program who had qualified for a Blu-ray. And on that Friday, I'm sitting here, right where we are now, with headphones on. I had the laptop open with the transcript, and I would listen to the tape, and I'd have to type in a keyword in the PDF file to find out where in the timeline, so I could match where I was, how far I had to go to get to this point of Al Shepard. And I'm watching the indicator coming towards the end of the file, and right when I'm thinking, oh no, it's it's going to cut out right before they say it. I hear Bruce McCandless call the crew and say, are you all around the microphone? We've got somebody here that wants to speak to you. And I see on the transcript, the next thing is the reprimand. And I'm like, I got it. So there was stuff like that. There was the Texas University had a lot of kinescopes, which are 16mm films of the television footage, which they graciously copied for me. And a lot of that stuff, like when the two Air Force test pilots are sitting in the zero-G vomit comet and eating the food, eating the food, that was on one of the reels that they sent me. And I was like, I've never seen this before. This it has to go in the film. A lot of stuff that I've uncovered. And of course, in the meantime, I see new stuff, and I go, oh, I'd like to put that in, like the Smeat material and Dr. Kahutek in Mission Control is stuff that I've recently found like 6 months ago. So I thought I have to put that in there. It looks much better than what was originally there.
It's interesting that couple of the space programs, excuse me, that were most important to building up to what we have now get the least recognition. Skylab being one, the Gemini program being the other. Apollo wouldn't have happened without Gemini.
No, definitely. Somebody was just discussing. Was that you actually on Facebook? Because somebody had brought that very thing up. Like,
It wasn't me.
Gemini is overlooked, and is there a good documentary about Gemini? There was a company called Spacecraft Films that brought out a set of all the Gemini footage, and they are the only ones to date that have done a doco on Gemini. Beautiful program. Again, not as forgotten as Skylab. What I found with Skylab, and this was the impetus for me to actually do it, when I would go to astronaut conventions or autograph shows where astronauts would appear at, if you had a Skylabber and you had a moonwalker, moonwalkers would have crowds of people going around the block 5 times. Skylabbers, you could go up and talk to them for 2 hours before somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, oh, I'd like an autograph. Can you move out of the way, please? And I thought, that's, these guys did the same thing. And half of them were Apollo astronauts anyway, like Jerry Carr, Jack Lousma, and I think Bill Pogue. They were supposed to walk on the moon. They didn't get their chance. So they flew on the next possible mission, and that was Skylab. And as the way the film came about for me, I wrote a book or researched a book, which I subsequently wrote, called Live TV from the Moon, because my background is in television, and I wanted to know how they developed the television systems that were used on Apollo. And I got to speaking very regularly with Stan Labar, who was the manager of the Westinghouse Lunar Camera television department. And every single phone call, he would be saying to me, Apollo was good, but Skylab is where we got really good with our television. You know, that was at the time where I was still thinking Skylab was a failure because it crashed in Australia. And I'm saying to him, what, Skylab, that thing that's, you know, sitting in the soil in Western Australia, that was where you were really good with television? And he said, yes, believe me. And so I managed to acquire quite a bit of material from a private collector that was haphazardly sorted across a whole bunch of VHS tapes, if you remember that format. And but they all had the slate at the beginning of the video, so I knew in the timeline where they should sit. And I did a second follow-up book called Live TV from Orbit, where I discussed the TV systems on Skylab and Apollo-Soyuz and Shuttle. And for that, I had to go through all the Skylab material. And it was when I was watching that finally in chronological order that I thought, actually, Stan, you were right. You know, there was a lot of stuff on there, scientific studies, experiments, and so forth. And I remember thinking, and it's my favorite clip in the film with Bill Pogue having the 3 blue spheres when they do the orbital maneuver. Had I seen that as a kid, I would have understood physics a whole heap better.
Yeah. Maybe we can switch back to Warminster. I have a couple questions just for the benefit of both groups. I wanted you to also mention you've written 3 mission report books and, of course, live TV from the moon. So I'd like to have you talk about that. And also, we did have a question about merchandise. If there's anything about, you know, can people purchase Searching for Skylab or anything else?
Yes, well, I think the main message I wanted to convey with the film was buy our movie. Not true. I mean, yes, it's a nice thing. I stole that joke from Not the 9 O'Clock News, which was a funny program on British television. The mission reports, if you are seriously into all the nitty-gritty technical details, they are the reports that were put out by NASA when the crew returned. You can find them online, but they are like 50 millionth generation photocopies, and the photographs you can't, it's just like a black page and you go, oh, that's supposed to be an astronaut, is it? I've gone and cleaned it up. What we've done, we've got the crew biographies, we've got the press release, the mission report, and the crew debriefs in this, plus a DVD. I'll get to the book, excuse me while I just stand up.
And they're quite substantial volumes. I mean, even still, because I am the proud nerdy owner of the mission reports.
That's Skylab 1 and 2. So that covers the launch of the space station, the anomaly that happened when the thermoshield got ripped off and the solar panel didn't deploy. Now, the one cool thing with Apogee books, they all have a DVD in the back of it. And on that DVD, I have put some really cool material. For example, in this book, we've got the news pool television footage of the launch of the space station. That came about as well. You know, this whole adventure of making a film, I approached everybody, JSC, KSC, Huntsville. What material do you have video-wise that I could possibly have a look at? And KSC wrote back to me and said, this is all we have. And they sent out a package with DVDs on it. There's half-an-hour documentaries that were made in the day that you can find on YouTube. And I'm going, I've got that. And I was driving back because I had to go to the customs office to declare them and pay the duty on them. And I look at the very last disc in the pack and I'm like, payload flow launch, what is this? And of course, the good thing in Germany, you're allowed to drive as fast as you like on the Autobahn. So I made it home in record time. And I come in, I turn the computer on, I put this thing on. I'm like, oh my God. It was a direct copy from the 2-inch master tape that they recorded of the launch of Skylab 1, SL1, which you see in the film, you know, when they're announcing, you know, the batteries are in place and we've got 15 minutes left on launch. That comes from that DVD. And no one has that footage. I was like, oh, wow. So the second book, Skylab 3, also has a nice DVD in there. And what we've done with that one, Jack Lousma gave several television transmissions where he toured through the entire spacecraft. And Rob Godwin, who is my publisher, is an avid computer graphics nut. He loves doing CG stuff. And he designed the entire Skylab in a computer graphic virtual reality, and has a virtual astronaut tour you. So Jack Lausmer will show you, you'll see the original footage, and then you'll go into this virtual reality where you can see exactly in relation to where Jack was, where everything was located and what was done. So, and then the final one, as you can see, it's a nice, big, thick edition. And as the comment was made, you know, Skylab was crucial as a bridge between Apollo and Shuttle. And you really get the vibe with this book, especially the crew debrief, that they were thinking, how will this relate to the Skylab cruise, the Space Shuttle cruise, once the Skylab project is finished? Because the only thing they had coming up was Apollo-Soyuz test project. And that was more of a publicity type mission, although one of my favorites. I really love what they were doing up there. So you can read about that in this debrief here. And the other cool thing on the DVD that's in this book as well, you have, thanks to Larry Turovsky, who was a student reporter, he managed to get into mission control as Skylab crashed, and he recorded the last 55 minutes of Skylab as it was detailed in mission control when it crashed into Western Australia. And the coolest thing was, about, again, a year and a half ago, I managed to acquire footage that was taken inside mission control when that happened. So I sent him a copy of all the reels, and I said, Larry, can you see yourself in there? And he took about 2 days, and he goes, I can't believe it. There I am in the corner. One little shot. It pans across. You see him. He was a young kid with a jacket, the flight jacket. And he said, I thought for the longest time that there was no one there with a camera, but there was, and this is fantastic. And I thought I was dreaming it. Now it's a confirmation that I was there. It's really cool. So little things that come and surprise you.
Yeah.
Oh, and sorry, you're asking about what you can buy all this stuff from our website, www.searchingforskylab.com. We have a shop. We have a shop that caters for the European market, the Australian market, and the US market. So if you click on the US shop, you'll get everything in US prices. We've got the books there. We've got DVD, Blu-ray. The DVDs are calibrated for the US system, so you will have absolutely no trouble at all playing it back. We've had a number of people buy them, and not one of them has said, I've had trouble playing it back.
Okay. I don't know. Anyone here in Warminster have any other questions? Yep, we got one here. He wants to know, how did you end up in Germany from Australia?
Oh, have we got another 2 hours? It came about originally. I didn't actually want to come to Germany. I did, but I didn't. I'm first generation Australian, mother German, father Polish. I work in television, and there was a company operating out of the UK in 1998 that was one of the first startups that was giving multi-channel platform options to the Polish market, and they needed somebody, and because of my Polish father, I thought, well, I've got a chance. They needed somebody in transmission, so I applied for the job. They filled out the immigration paperwork for me, and I moved out to the UK, not realizing that I didn't like the country that much. And I thought, well, I can still speak German, so let's see if I can find anything in Germany before I head back to Australia. And RTL Television, which is where I work now and have done so for the last 21 years, they needed desperately as well transmission coordinators, and they also filled out all the immigration paperwork for me to come out to Germany. And I actually do like it here. I visited Cologne about 35 years ago, and I remember when I visited, I thought, oh, it reminds me very much of Sydney, and never thought anything else more about it until suddenly I'm driving here with my car from the UK, moving to Germany, going, well, that's a funny chain of events, isn't it? So that's how I came to Germany. And yes, I do speak German. And yes, the first 3 months here were a nightmare because I didn't speak it as good as I thought I could.
Oh, do you speak Australian with a German accent now?
No, but you've seen it happen here. I will, when I go back, it takes me 2 days before I start speaking English fluently again. And I'll be mid-sentence and then I know the German word and I'm like, what is the English word again? I can't remember. Or there's a phenomenon that happens in Germany with English speakers and Germans in English-speaking countries. They do a language which is called Denglish. So you mix German and English together. And if you understand both languages, you'll get what we're talking about. Like with my mother, I can do it no worries because that's how she talked when we were growing up. Weird. The one thing I didn't do is lose my Australian accent. So when I do speak English, I speak with an Australian accent. It is debatable whether that is real English or not. You know, we can discuss that at the pub.
All right.
Let me ask what's next for you.
Psychological treatment. See this beard? See this beard? When I started the film, it wasn't grey, it was dark. And then I'll tell you this, because we were talking about this in Florida. It was a labor of love, a passion. Not that there's any giveaway at all behind me. As I was saying before, you know, I didn't want to make a film, but I felt I owed it to the Skylabbers to have their story told. And I don't recall this conversation. My wife always reminds me that that's what I said to her. I said around about, I'd say now 10 years ago, around about 2013, I said, look, these guys aren't getting any younger. And if we don't do it now, it'll be another 20 years before someone gets the idea to do a film about Skylab. If we approach a big studio, that by the time they approve it, not to sound morbid, these guys won't be here anymore. And so she had her company at the time had the finances, and she said, look, I want to get into e-learning. Let's do this film. It qualifies under the sort of broad banner of e-learning. Let's do the film. And so we did it without any studio behind us. We did it fully independently out of our own pocket. And as Eleanor will tell you, Kickstarter supporters. And what they always say, making a film is the easy part. Selling it is where it gets really difficult. And what we didn't anticipate was the amount of active attempts to stop us from being successful. Very difficult situation. Making a film to begin with is not the most ideal investment you can do, but I'll tell you this story, and this is the one that always makes me think, yeah, you know, despite the ups and downs, we've had really good highs and we've had absolutely terrible lows. I've gone through you know, an emotional roller coaster, I can tell you that much. We did a sneak peek of the film in Zurich with Ed Gibson, and up until that time, Skylab was still sort of, what's Skylab? And there was a Zoom conference. We showed the film, and then afterwards in the cinema, they had a little conference room, roughly like what you are all doing now. There were 300 people that showed up, and we did a Q&A with Ed Gibson. And at the end of the interview, the crowd, he got a standing ovation, and he could see them. So we turned the computer around, and his face, the look on his face was like, finally, I'm getting the recognition for what I did that people have forgotten about. And I stood there and I was getting really choked up. I thought, that's why I did the film. You know, so, and the really cool thing is today, if you go to an astronaut convention, they have the same amount of people waiting to see them as the Apollo guys. And I have played a part in that. I have heard it direct from the astronauts that they have thanked us for doing that. There's a lot of people involved, like Eleanor as well. You've you know, done so much to bring the awareness of Skylab to people. Emily Carney, Brian Fiore has a website, Skylab Apollo 70s enthusiasts. There's another group now called I Love Apollo, Skylab, and ASTP missions. This is now bringing a forgotten era and a very triumphant one. That's why I called the film America's Forgotten Triumph, because it should have been a disaster, and it wasn't. It was one of the best successes you can think of. I defy you to find a business today that can, if they're facing a $2.2 billion problem, and if they don't solve that problem, they're out of business, minus 2.2 billion, to fix that problem within 10 days.
Yeah.
And that's what impressed me about Skylab. And these people are so down to earth. You know, you walk up to the astronauts and they'll have the time of day for you. They'll go bend over backwards. We were speaking to Bob Crippen last week, who was involved in the SMEET program, and also Capcom for Skylab, who played with the Helen Garriott prank. And it was a nice feeling that for once, you know, there were autograph hunters that were coming up to him, and he said, "Sorry, I need to talk to these people, that they get my time for now, please." And that was myself and my wife. And I'm like, oh my, you know, we're being recognized as well for what we've done. We've gone through through the mill, and to have the acknowledgement from these guys, it's like, you know, I did it for you. I did it for you guys.
Can I ask, you hinted that you were actively opposed in this project as well. Can you talk about any examples of how that happened?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to give any names away, and they always say if you complain about the competition, you're actually the bad guy. So all I can say is the big companies that had a lot of money were pushing us aside. Basically, well, pushing us aside, more like bulldozing us aside, hoping that we would just give up, throw our hands up and give up. And we thought, no. There's too much resting on this. And so we've just been at it. What we did, we were researching CIA techniques, and they figured out by doing role playing within the CIA that the ones who played the terrorists would always outsmart the ones playing the federal agents, because the ones that were playing the terrorists would never give their plans out, whereas the CIA guys would. And they were saying that is a very interesting thing, because no one knew what those guys were doing, and therefore they had the edge at every single point. This was like a training exercise done in the 90s or the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. And we were getting a lot of advice from people like that, who were like hostage negotiators and so forth. We signed up for courses with people like that, just to know how we could conduct ourselves in business. Because me as a TV tech, I'm not really a salesperson. So we had to learn all this from scratch. So, you know, we were also wet behind the ears. I will say that. You know, it's not like we were there going, we know what we're doing. You know, we were blindly going in there, not having any idea. The best example I could say, I jumped headfirst into a pool that didn't have very much water in it. It was tough, but you know, from a personal point of view, I've learned and I've grown so much as a person. So now I'm in a good mood. I'll tell you, yeah, it was worth it. Ask me when I'm in a downer, and I'll go, never. We had to break away from trying to fight the people that were against us, and that also, it's not just you know, within the space community. I'm talking in general. You know, distributors. Oh, we dodged a bullet with one of them. We went to Cannes to try and get a distributor for our film. And there was one fellow super enthused about the film and was promising us 1.5 million that we'd get within the first year. And, you know, well, this is the plan we have to sell it to my network in the US. And we were one day away from signing the contract with him. And we decided to do a bit of research. Turned out this guy was as crooked could be. There was a producer who had been promised £100,000 from this company, and found out he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And the company just said, we're not going to pay you. What are you going to do? Sue us, you're going to be dead anyway. And that was the company we were about ready to sign with. So we were just like, you know, somebody up there is looking after us. And we've decided to do it all by ourselves. Now, of course, we don't have the clout that a big company would have like Sony or so forth. But we are in full control of the film, which allows us then to, without problem, say to Eleanor, yeah, show the film by all means, please. At the end of the day, our goal was to get Skylab recognized. If we earn money from it, it'd be nice to get some of the minus back up to zero. If you added everything up that we invested into it, you could have probably bought yourself a house over the 10 years it took us to make the film. Like I said, it's a labor of love. We've had some amazing moments, like being invited to Esperance to see the 40th anniversary there, to talk to people that saw it crash. We had our world premiere in the Rocket Center in Huntsville, where Skylab was pretty much put together. We've visited Houston. We've gone to KSC, which are really fabulous to work with. We just now came back from the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, so it's just been a fantastic journey. We just have to, remember, go with the flow. We've chosen this path, so let's take it as it comes.
Oh. You know what? I know it's approaching 8 o'clock your time, Dwight. So we want to be respectful to let you have some of your Saturday night intact. But this
Eurovision starts in half an hour. I've got to watch that garbage.
But I think that this has been fabulous. I think both groups definitely enjoyed this. And this is the first time that we've actually done a simulcast with the Pax River Museum too. So we're grateful that you were willing to play along with that.
Oh, cool. I was so happy again, just knowing that people would learn about Skylab. Hopefully the next time the astronauts are in town, you can go, I have watched the movie, and he'll get both of them, Ed and all three of them, actually, Joe, if he's there as well. They actually are very supportive of the film, so they have no qualms about talking about it. And Joe Kerwin said to me last week, I said, thank you so much for your time in appearing in the film. And Joe just went, well, see, the thing is, you made me a star. And I'm like, oh, yes, I did.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. But again, thank you so much. It's a wonderful film. So grateful.
Thank you.
Grateful that you made it happen.
Thank you. And
we'll be looking for your next movie, right?
I was ready to say never again, but I spoke to somebody quite important related to the first person that walked on the moon. So we might be doing a joint production with them. It's all still left to be discussed, but looking very good. They were very enthused. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, everyone's we'll eagerly await that, and then we can do another simulcast when that movie comes out. So
probably Apollo-Soyuz test project if it all goes well.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone again and give you back the rest of your afternoon and evening, respectively. And thanks again.
You are very welcome. Thank you for your time, everybody. Thanks for sticking around, listening to me prattle on.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, if you've got any questions, if you think afterwards, just go to our website and drop us an email, and I'll get back to you. Just say you're at the screening, and I'll go, what screening are you talking about? We've got so many.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right,
See you later.
bye-bye.